Hello everyone. So the main purpose of my brief talk today is to outline one trade agreement that Australia is currently negotiating with 15 other countries in the Asia-Pacific region. So it's the 10 member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, that being Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia and Myanmar, with the 6 countries that already have existing bilateral agreements with ASEAN. So that's including Australia, China, India, Japan, South Korea and New Zealand. It's a significant agreement because it includes countries that represent half of the world's population and almost a third of the world's GDP. And it's very significant for Australia because it represents 9 of Australia's top 13 trading partners, almost 60% of Australia's two-way trade, and 70% of Australia's goods and services exports. So the negotiations for RCEP commenced in May 2013, and it was with the guiding principle of ASEAN centrality, that this would be an agreement that would facilitate the economic development of the ASEAN countries in particular, taking into account their differing levels of economic development needs, allowing for flexibility, and just being very aware that there are many low and middle income countries negotiating in this agreement. So we've had 17 rounds of negotiations since May 2013. They've been held in the various countries that are negotiating, and the most recent one was in Japan in late February, and the next round is in the Philippines in May. So like the TPP that Ron mentioned is sort of in a zombie state at the moment, the RCEP negotiations aren't just about trade on standards or rules regarding goods. It's about trade on services, financial services, investment, economic and technical cooperation, intellectual property, competition, dispute settlement, telecommunications, and electronic commerce. So there's a lot going on in terms of the negotiations. And I think a key point that we need to make is that these are being negotiated in secret. So until the text is agreed on and released, it's very hard for public health practitioners and academics or experts to know what's being negotiated and how this agreement might affect health. We usually have to rely on WikiLeaks leaking a chapter or text for us to be able to look and see, okay, how might this agreement and those various areas affect health? I think what's also very interesting about the RCEP agreement is that it doesn't include the United States. So many see RCEP as China's attempt against the US and the TPP. So there's this view, until Trump just recently withdrew the US from the TPP, that RCEP and TPP were 2 agreements that sort of represented China and the US jostling for power over the Asia-Pacific region. So India and China weren't included in the TPP negotiations, and the US is not included in the RCEP negotiations. It was also the case that both RCEP and TPP were seen as stepping stones towards this grand free trade area of the Asia-Pacific. And we're not too sure what that means now that the TPP is sort of in a zombie state, but there is definitely a view that while they're competing, they sort of represent China and the US competing against each other, there's also this vision that somehow we'll be able to move forward to this grand free trade area that will involve lots of countries in the Asia-Pacific trading. So when we're thinking about the political context of RCEP, we really are informed by the negotiations and the climate of the TPP. It's important to note that almost half of the countries that are negotiating in RCEP have already agreed to certain standards and settings in the TPP, although they haven't ratified the agreement. So we're going to go into these in the next panel in terms of like the specific health impact that these agreements can have. But as Ron mentioned, there are several issues with the TPP in terms of how it might affect health. And if we're looking at RCEP, even though the initial proposal was that this is about equitable development for low and middle income countries, if half of the RCEP countries have already agreed to TPP, is that going to lead to some sort of weakening in terms of a block of low and middle income countries that can resist pressure on them? If already some of them, half of the ASEAN member countries are agreeing to certain standards in TPP, will they be able to stand strong in the negotiations and say that we want to protect our interests? Or are we seeing a strategy to sort of divide and conquer these countries and how they can resist pressure from more powerful countries? At the same time, we do know that there are countries in the agreement that are trying to resist pressures to adopt TPP-like settings. So at the recent meeting in Japan, the trade negotiating chief from Indonesia publicly urged members not to bring in rules from the TPP. So really it's unclear, it's quite quite challenging when we don't know the up-to-date settings in RCEP because it's being negotiated in secret, but we do know that there are countries trying to push certain standards in RCEP from the TPP, and we know that there's this sort of political resistance, and we're trying to identify, I guess, from a public health point of view, where we can help member states in trying to support them in resisting standards that are going to affect their public health. Okay, thank you.